Yeah, it is. And if everything went well, we should be live now. So welcome everyone to another episode of Everything Outside Code. And on these episodes, I bring on a fantastic founder, GTM expert, and we have one very fantastic founder today. We have Mick Gosset. Mick is the founder of Joint Flows, and we'll be talking about sales data today and everything that has to do with sales. You could say hi, Mick, and we proceed from there.
Hey, yeah, my name is Mick. I'm one of the co-founders here at JoinFlows. So we power essentially AI agents for deal progression. We speak about nonlinear sales cycle, essentially complex sales cycle that don't go straight from the top to the bottom of your funnel, which is the vast majority of sales cycles nowadays. There's a level of complexity. You mentioned the word dynamic. It's
Yeah.
very much the the reality of the facts nowadays is things are very dynamic and um, they need to be treated as such. So with a high level of flexibility and agility, which CRMs don't enable you to do. So that creates a big gap, and we solve that gap.
hmm Yeah. So, I mean, I'm almost tempted to like jump into the weeds of dynamic sales pipelines, but I'll throw it back a bit. How did you start? How did you co-found or
Yeah.
co-find? I don't know, co-found Joint Flows. How did that start?
So we were having issues progressing sales opportunities to fit to the finish line, basically. There was a big gap in our ability to understand, get control and visibility about what the buyer needed to go through. There was no way for us to capture buying processes, to put that into our systems, to then forecast based on what the buyer needed to go through, each of them individually, and then come up with a number to then communicate to the board. And our CEO at the time was asking for updates every hour. Hey, where is this deal at? When is this gonna sign? Have you got this lined up? Is the contract out? And I had no reporting system allowing me to then push the information back to him. The only thing I had was HubSpot, Salesforce, with a staged funnel, five or
hmm
six stages, typically in a very specific order: disco, demo, negotiation, security, legal, close one, close last, which
Yeah.
was completely misaligned with what the buyer needed to go through. So a very simple funnel on paper, a very complex sales process. Not only is complex, but always unique.
Yeah.
And it was those two worlds never matched. So the only thing I had to my defense was my ability to create anecdotes around what I've identified as the next step on the buying cycle, and then kind of try and fit it in that really awkward funnel that the
Yeah.
CRM was provided. And it never worked. It never worked because it's impossible to fit a 9 month process with 47 stakeholders into a 5 stage funnel. Like
Yeah.
it's the level of simplicity versus the level of complexity just don't add up.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, I currently relate to that. And how I know is I forget to update Pipe Drive, which we use to manage like our sales pipeline.
Yeah.
Because I move the deal forward to say a proposal issued state, but then something else happens. I need to have like talk to someone else, and they are a decision maker somehow. And this varies for different prospects, and different deals. But there's no way to capture the individual like difference. What just happens is within each deal, I get like a huge log with like
Hmm.
different actions, different meetings, and they vary for each customer. And before you said this, I actually never thought about it because I haven't looked into like the data and try to see like similarities and maybe where we could optimize something or where we maybe lose deals in this non-linear sales process. So I'm curious, how does Joint Flows then approach this and try to solve it? Because I have this problem now. That's what I just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
realized.
Yeah. So we're funnel agnostic. We don't care about the stages as much as CRMs do, because for us it's irrelevant.
hmm
Like to your point, when you're in a buying cycle, you're probably involved, and the bigger the deal, the more people you're involved with. several stakeholders, and they all at different level. If you were to look at that funnel, they all at different stages. One of them could come in late, require a demo. You've already spoken about prices, so maybe you've ticked that box, but now you've got two streams of conversations allegedly sitting at two different stages in the funnel.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you report on? Do you report on what you've done first, where you stand last, like somewhere in the middle? It breaks
Yeah.
at scale, right? Because each
Mm-hmm.
opportunity has a different setup. What we're looking at is the work to be done, understanding what the buying process looks like,
Mm-hmm.
the level of complexity of that buying process, and the speed at which we can clear that complexity. So it's
Okay.
very much like a project management way of managing deals, which allows you complete fluidity, complete dynamism, to go back to the dynamic word you used. If you're able to then capture the work to be done, it's super easy to then forecast. And it's super easy to understand that despite having done a pricing call, a negotiation call, you still have 2 or 3 demos to go through and maybe an integration call and speak about onboarding. And that remaining work to be done represent X amount of days, X level
Yeah.
of complexity. Therefore, you should budget for that before committing to the deal.
Yeah.
Having that
Yeah.
level of
That.
granularity, enables you to
Mm-hmm.
then have a very, very clear forecast that is based on each individual buying cycle, with the ability to then concentrate that data to have a solid number that you can call, one which is an upside and one that is probably at risk, which can count for the next fiscal period.
Yeah. This makes sense. And then I'm curious, are you then able to identify patterns between multiple deals? Say I'm interested in like sales optimization, coming from like a sales ops, like a sales operation standpoint. I'm not in the deals, but I'm trying to see how can we optimize our sales process. Do you then
Yeah,
envision that something like this provides me with all the insights I need to say, hey, there's actually some part of our process that should almost be a stage, if we were to call it something like that. But that piece, we need to handle some optimizations around there. Do you think this is something joint flows, then gives you insights on?
yeah, that's bang on. That's exactly what we do. Now that you've captured the work to be done, you
Mm-hmm.
can track it, you can measure it, and you can identify inefficiencies, which you're unable to do if you dumped your sales process down to 5 or 6 stages. If you only
Mm-hmm.
have 5 or 6 stages, you can only identify 5 or 6 problems,
Yeah.
right? Opportunities. If you don't look at stages at all, what you identify are buying milestones and the work required around the buying milestones to then deliver against that milestones, prep work, alignment work, maybe a cycle of approval internally, like think about deal desk, legal, like that requires prep work, some homework to be done
Yeah.
essentially. We time everything, we calibrate everything at deal level to say, okay, well, in this context, the deal desk process represents 8 percentage point of difficulty. If you
Yeah.
add more step to the process, then proportionally that becomes smaller. If you clear some steps from the process, that proportionally becomes bigger. But we've
Yeah.
been able, with some of our clients, to identify that their legal procedure internally was dragging on to 2 to 3 weeks
Oh,
on a,
and they
on a
weren't
30
aware of. Yeah.
on a 30-week sales cycle. 3 weeks out of a 30-week sales cycle is
It's
10%.
10%. Yeah.
It completely controllable, right? It completely internal.
Yeah.
So we came to say, look, break down that cycle into 4 or 5 milestones, steps.
Mm-hmm.
Create MSAs for SMB that are slightly different than your MSAs for enterprise, and operate like that. And that cycle has moved from an average of 10 days to an average of 3 days.
Yeah. Wow.
They gain another month or two of sales
Yeah.
cycle essentially each year. That's crazy.
Yeah. And if they maintain like a constant pipeline throughput, this means that I guess conversion for them is higher because the deal cycle times are shrunk
Yeah.
eventually based on the optimization you bring. Wow, that I think that's interesting, an interesting value proposition to whoever you're selling to, I can imagine, is hey, we can help you identify, inefficiencies and gaps in your process, and which would
Yeah.
eventually, lead to more revenue. So I'm curious. This is with joint flows. What's the manual, crude method of doing this? If there was a way to do this without using joint flows, what would that look like?
And that's the problem, right? The problem is that you do that manually. Spreadsheets get in the way. Typically, you also start exchanging on Slack channels and kind of asynchronous communication systems, Teams, WhatsApp, whatever. And this data doesn't get captured. Not only it doesn't
Yeah,
get captured, but when you start putting a salesperson into a spreadsheet, there's a disaster about to happen. Like it's gonna get ugly, and the impact on this ugliness is your conversion rate. Your
yeah,
conversion rate is affected. Deal velocity is affected, which means that the sales cycle or the buying cycle you should navigate it within 4 months takes 8, 9 months to go through. You get exposed to more competition because people have more time to go and compare the options, and therefore the conversion rate drops as well.
yeah, yeah. I can imagine, the number of spreadsheets tracking all conversations, tracking important bits from those conversations too that are worthy of, being examined, getting them into a spreadsheet, and then trying to find common patterns across all deals.
Yeah.
Which back and forth is common to, a specific amount of deals, and then I can think about the headache this would pose if you were to do this for multiple deals. Say you have like a lot of deal flow monthly. That
Mhm.
just becomes impossible to understand.
Yeah, 85% of sales and buying cycles data is not captured by CRM systems.
Yeah,
It doesn't sit anywhere. It sits within a spreadsheet, a Word document, a presentation, a follow-up email. It doesn't
yeah, an
really
email.
mean anything. Yeah. And then you're
Yeah,
trying to optimize on 15% of the actual data and 5 stages in your CRM funnel, and then you're wondering why your conversion rate is not growing. Like, what?
yeah,
Well, there's only so much you can do, right, with the tip
yeah.
of the iceberg. Like, try to move the needle from 15 to 30, just 15 to 30, and
Hmm.
then you already have a lot of opportunities available for you. We unlock that fully. Like, we move from 15 to 100%.
Wow.
Yeah, and then that sometimes can be a little bit overwhelming because you're like, I didn't know any of this happened. Like, I,
Yeah,
I didn't know Bob was working on putting a demo instance together for 3 weeks before getting ready to actually deliver it. Had I known that, then I would have provided him with a software that turns this 3 weeks process into a
yeah,
1 week process, and then you know, and then yeah, all of this gets surfaced, and then you can start doing actual work.
yeah. That's, I mean, before I dive into like, setting up these data, like, because I feel like before we can get these data to joint flows, it has to be somewhere, right? And teams have to make like some conscious effort to prepare it in the right format. Or how do you see, again, the path to better sales data before joint flows? Because I do know the sales data, like you mentioned, they're in emails. Personally, I have them in meeting recordings. More
Yeah.
recently, I have them in like, note takers, conversations, even like one-on-one chats, and sometimes they could even be physical. When I meet
Hmm.
someone, for coffee, a prospect, to talk about stuff, and I just have it in my note, or I have it in my head. So where does it start, and how do you consolidate all these to, maybe move it into joint flows or make sense of this data?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. What's the difference between a deal which is progressing
Hmm.
and a deal which is stalling? What's the core? What does that boil down to? One that is gonna go forward, and then which is gonna stay still.
uh, so usually, I mean, for us, I would say it's having a goal, right? So I do something. I set up like a meeting for each prospect. So when I'm speaking to prospect, towards the end, I set up a call for the next like checkpoint, so it doesn't
Next step.
like drop off, like a next step, and it sort of holds us accountable. And for me, I've sort of identified that having that common ground with set like clear expectations and timelines, that's usually the difference between a deal that would move forward and what will break down. I haven't clearly thought about it this way, but now
Yeah.
that you ask, that's sort of how I see it. Is that critical step has been a game changer, at least in the last year.
Yeah. So the way we see it is that a deal making progression makes progression because there's alignment.
Yeah.
A deal that doesn't make progression because there's a lack of alignment. And there are three disciplines to sales in terms of alignment. You've got alignment between the problem and the solution. All right. What you've
Okay.
identified as something you can
Yeah.
fix. You've got alignment on the timelines. When this problem to be fixed by. And then you've got alignment in terms of processes, roles and responsibilities of stakeholders. So timelines and next steps are part of essentially that
Yeah.
overlap between timelines and processes. But if you've got alignment on three of these disciplines, 3 out of 3, the deals just happens naturally,
Yeah.
right? The problem is that this alignment is really awkward to create manually with the current systems. Your conversational intelligence, your call recordings doesn't create alignment, right? It just records the call
Yeah.
and tells you
Yeah.
something about the call. What you need is an execution platform that then creates an environment where you can align on the problem and the
Mm-hmm.
solution, on the timelines and on people's roles and responsibilities, both internally and externally. And that's exactly what we do. This work happens when deals are progressing. It just happens offline in a way which is not visible for leadership.
Yeah.
So we created a platform where salespeople can create this alignment like they were extremely talented project managers without having to have the skill sets for that. And then once this alignment happens, everything
Mm-hmm.
is then documented and exposed both to leadership internally and to the buyer externally in terms of documenting what's happened
Yeah.
so far.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. I think about like the CRM tool that we use. Um, it tries to foster that. At least I use Pipedrive, and the only thing
Mhm.
it does is um, proactively requires me to set a task after completing a previous task, and that's it. And sometimes I don't have a next like task, the task that's coming up,
Yeah.
and I don't know what to do, right? Because again, the process isn't linear. I was unable to set something up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that's something to think about for sure.
That's where deals are made or dead basically.
Yeah.
You don't have a next steps typically because you don't have alignment between the problem and the solution, or enough at least to
Yeah.
create timelines. If you did have complete alignment between the problem and the solution, the timelines are almost a byproduct of that. Like
Mm-hmm.
we spoke about this problem. How big is this problem? When do we need to fix this by? I
Yeah.
really need to fix this by
Yeah.
June this year. Okay, well, we've got a 3-month process to go through in order to align everyone to the
Mm-hmm.
solution. Are you happy to help me move these people into the committee, the buying committee for me? Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. All right, cool. Well, in this case, I'll do that on my side as well. Let's meet tomorrow, not next week, tomorrow, and
Yeah.
we'll check where we've landed. So yeah, this no, no, to go back to the data thing, the data is here, is just not formatted and captured in a way which enables any conclusion. So you can never make improvement on something you don't actually track.
Yeah.
If you start tracking the data, then you can identify that when you don't go through XYZ step, the alignment between the problem and the solution is not here. You
Mm-hmm.
need to work on your pitch. You need to work on how you run the demo. Then you can make those assumptions through the data. But if you don't have that to start with, then you're always in a position where it's easier to just create more pipeline, essentially,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is
Thanks.
crazy.
Thanks for helping me clearly articulate that, because I just thought about it. While you were speaking, I decided to go back to like 2 to 3 deals where we didn't have like a next step, like not the next step, but we didn't set up the customary call,
Mm.
the next call. And I actually realized now that we didn't have an alignment between the problem and the solution. It's more, okay, I've heard everything you have to do. I don't know if this is even a fit. I'll go figure out, or I'm going to
Yep.
pitch this. or float this internally, and I'll let you know. I would push for like, hey, maybe we could just check in 2 weeks, even sometimes a month. They're like, well, we could, and we see. But usually 2 weeks before that or a week before that, they cancel the meeting and they're like, yeah, this isn't a good fit. I just know the problem.
Yeah.
The problem wasn't strong enough. It wasn't at that tipping point, or the solution just wasn't a fit.
Hmm.
You did mention something that I find interesting, which is focusing on pipeline conversion versus feeding the pipeline. What's your take on that, and how do you see that? Because it seems like you focus on the pipeline conversion and making sure that each deal gets to the end rather than just feeding an inefficient pipeline.
Yeah. So our take is, as long as you don't have a fully optimized and highly converting process to leads, you shouldn't create more pipeline unnecessarily, because it's all ratios, right? If you've got a 15% conversion rate, then every new opportunity you're going to bring into the fold is going to convert half at the rate
Yeah.
at what it should be if you had 30% conversion rate.
Mm-hmm.
At which point, creating more pipeline is actually extremely beneficial because everything converts way more off the back
Yeah.
of that. There's a big thing around close lost opportunities as well. Like, a lot of sales leaders never focus on closing faster lost deals. They're trying hard to win. They're not trying hard to lose. And it's
Okay.
crazy when conversion rates, they're never above 50%. You never close more opportunities than you lose. Or it's very rare, right? You often have a
Yeah.
conversion rate around
You need
20.
to be selling gold or something. Selling
Exactly.
gold for cheap.
Yeah, exactly. Which means that you spend most of your time losing opportunities.
Yeah.
And the amount of effort you spend losing opportunities versus the progression you've made up to the point of losing that opportunity is greater than the amount of effort you spend winning opportunities, like for like.
Yeah.
So you're better off losing faster to some extent, because that's most of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So if you
Yeah.
can find, to your, you were saying like these 2 or 3 opportunities I went to, I didn't have clear alignment on the problem. It's fine. If you detected that really early on, no problem, right? You haven't spent a week, 2 weeks
Yeah.
trying to put a business case together, aligning team on your side, spending effort to create a
Mm-hmm.
proposal, blah, 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 fake case studies, all of that these people usually do. You just called it a day when you knew that it was not fit for purpose or not strong enough versus the other opportunities you had alignment with. But
Yeah.
no one seems to be focusing on this. So a lot of what we bring to the table is data around when it's time to call it a day in your live opportunities, because your progression pace and your progression rate is slowing down. You're
Yeah.
not progressing into the buying cycle because there's a lack of alignment. Stop
Mm-hmm.
trying.
Yeah.
Stop, move on to the next one.
Yeah.
If you reduce
Ah.
significantly your close lost as opposed to try to increase your closed won,
Mm-hmm.
then everything else
Yeah.
is kind of moving proportionally up in comparison.
Yeah.
So
This sounds
it's
like
very
trying to
interesting.
reduce like sunk cost fallacy. We all don't see it, but then it's nice to know that there's a tool out there that says, "Hey, I know you've spent a lot of time and effort, but you need to kill it ASAP and move
Yeah,
on to stuff that you can win."
yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah,
that
exactly.
definitely does. Yeah, it does make sense. And it's something I do now is from the very first call, I try to disqualify as much as possible, at least orient my mind to try to disqualify the prospect to see if
Yeah,
like is this something that would fall off along the way? Are they certain? Are they just trying to lead me on? Because I talk to some prospects, they sound like yeah, like this is fantastic. It's like the best next best thing, but then they drop off along the line after I've like tried. And I recently had a prospect, for instance, that asked me, "How do you do outbound?" I was like, "We just send emails to folks that we feel have a problem." And she's like, "This is like your method is fantastic because we have this problem like right now. I was literally talking about it the previous day, and you sent me an email the next day. Like this couldn't have come at a better time. Guess what? I've been chasing her for the last 3 weeks. She hasn't replied my
Yeah.
emails, isn't like saying anything. And in my head, I'm like, this same person said, this is the next best thing for them. And the pitch
Mm.
was good, but just ghosted beyond return. Yeah. Yesterday, I just
Yeah.
closed the deal. I was like, yeah, this is not worth my time chasing and sending anything or preparing anything for them. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Working on like keeping an eye on closed lost, as you said.
Yeah. Drop it. It's quite easy to drop as well. Drop it by half.
Yeah.
It might be crazy to think about. You can improve a metric by 50%, but do it on duration. Like you're gonna close lost this deal in 6 months' time when you've burnt your credibility, offered an unnecessary discount, and all of that.
Yeah.
Challenge the status quo now, like 2 weeks in. Hey, we've had that call. I appreciate the call sounded good. It doesn't feel like the pain is big enough for me to come and and bring a viable solution. It feels like there's probably other areas of your business you can create more efficiencies around. Is that fair?
Hmm.
Yeah, actually, I was trying not to be rude, but you're right. It's a solution to a problem, but I don't think the problem is big enough for us compared to other
Yeah.
problems we've got. Fine.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're saving me 6 months of follow up and trying to
Yeah.
get in front of you again.
Yeah. I think there's mutual respect after that. You probably even become friends once
Yeah.
you once you go that path. Um, I so typically, I mean, the folks that make like the first contact with these prospects that have the opportunity to qualify or disqualify prospects are SDRs. And recently, there's been like the buzz around like AI SDRs and what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing and how they would replace all the SDRs
Mm.
on LinkedIn, for instance. I see that every other day is how like your AI SDRs now. I'd love to get your take on that. How do you see AI transforming that initial pipeline progression stage, at least?
I think it's very tough, and it's diminishing return through and through. So the more people do it in a single market, the less
Hmm.
the channel becomes relevant, because
Yeah.
I think they can reach a level of personalization which is higher and faster to reach than if you were to do it manually. I think the problem is because they're all built on top of a ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini. The actual personalization is more or less the same. Like they're gonna go and
Hmm.
tap into the same data points, which is have they scrape your LinkedIn profile, the news, the CRM data available, and therefore the output is very similar one message to the next. So the problem is not even about personalization anymore. The problem is about having the person even read these emails to start
Okay.
with, let alone what's in the email. And to your point, everything then becomes timing as opposed to
Relevance.
personalization, because
Yeah.
personalization has been commoditized. Timing hasn't to that extent. So if you can be timely across perhaps multiple channels that are less swamped, content is huge, right? If you got the right content nowadays, it does have the work. It does have the work on creating pipeline. It does have the work on closing the pipeline that you've
Yeah.
created. And that's being on the right device at the right time to the right person, which is harder to do, which is easier to do than if you're just focusing on the email versus
Yeah.
another 100 suppliers doing the exact same thing as you.
Yeah.
So we don't send emails. We've stopped email sequencing email campaigns because it doesn't need, it doesn't move the needle that much for us, at least. Like what we focus on is timely outreach on the
Yeah.
other channels, cold calling, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and in person through really good engaging content like this podcast, for instance. This will have way
Yeah.
more value for us in terms of prospecting activities than if I was
Hmm.
to do a bunch of emails to 2,000 people tonight.
Yeah. Oh, I I couldn't agree with you more. We face like um, the same dilemma. I started doing like cold outreach, late 2023. I first started with obviously paying some consultant, sent a bunch of like, shit emails, didn't work, reformed those, and started like hyper personalizing these emails from LinkedIn. Um,
Yeah,
at the start, they worked, but then I realized that these things have like a life of around 3 weeks. Then I see the strategy on LinkedIn and it's gone.
yeah,
So scrap that. And then I realized what worked was just timing, like you said. And this quote, I think that's a quote I need to frame, which you said, which is, personalization is commoditized, but timing isn't. And that's where you can truly win. So that's also what we focused on. We saw that timing is everything, especially if you have like a relatively small market of folks
yeah,
that care about the solution that you want, that you're offering. We just focused on timing, and that sort of worked. We've looked at other channels. We actually stopped outbound, and again, to your point, it was just more. I like to say ABM supported outbound. That's
yeah,
something I
yeah,
made up internally. So it's almost like we know an account is ready to buy, and then we reach out to them, even though marketing doesn't say like, "Hey, like there's no
mm,
marketing intent yet," but we've seen like a lot of problems. The CEOs probably put a message somewhere they're hiring for some role, so we've qualified them properly, and we know they have this problem. That's only when I reach out, and even that, it's not. I'm not reaching out with like some personalized message around. Maybe I know what high school you went to or scored
yeah,
A's. Those cringe personalized messages. Uh, I don't send any of that. It's like, hey, I see, you have this problem. And here's proof, right? Maybe you're
yeah,
interested in this, and it's totally okay if you're not. Like, I give them a way out. If you are, I love to chat about how we could help. But if you're not, that's cool. Just wanted to connect. And
mm,
they either reply like, be like, hey, I'm so glad you didn't try to sell me something immediately. But in my head, I'm like, I actually tried. Like I offered something, but it just didn't feel like
yeah,
sales. The usual stuff to them. So yeah, to your point, timing is everything. And yeah, AI currently probably hasn't gotten like timing right. Or do you feel like that's something that AI tools that are available at least can maybe be tweaked somehow through the data? We can glean into when like timing is right, and then the AI tool could reach out. I don't know what that world looks like, but I know timing is usually very subjective, so it's hard to map out like patterns to it and automate it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's also about understanding your ICP,
Hmm.
understanding buying signal, and then making a conclusion and a decision about the fact that when they start speaking about this and when they start reaching a stage of XYZ, then the timing is probably more right than wrong. And therefore, we should start focusing on getting back in front of them.
Yeah,
Email is an option, obviously, but there are probably other channels where you get more easier face time than sending an email that is going to be part of another 600 emails they receive that day. That is
yeah,
also automatically filtered out nowadays by AI. Say this is a cold email from an unknown sender. Go into the social uh, label, and then you don't see it at
oh
all.
yeah,
Like I've
yeah,
got, it's crazy. Yeah,
yeah. I can imagine, you personalizing emails with AI to send, and then some AI tool, Gemini, is, you know, just taking all that email and
scanning
throwing
it.
it into it's like AI for AI, which is the best. They probably use Gemini to personalize the emails, and Google uses Gemini to filter out
Their own email.
to filter out their own emails. So yeah, that's definitely like something interesting um to think about. Um, when we talk about data and better sales data, how do you see this differing between like outbound? I know most of what we've been talking about have been like almost outbound focused, but how do you see this different between outbound and inbound, and how important is it? Is there even a distinction, or since we're focusing on the pipeline, there really isn't? What do you think about like both motions?
I think you should assume that someone coming inbound has reached a level of education and understanding about your offering, which is greater than someone you contact out of the cold and you get through an outbound campaign, right?
Hmm.
Which will then require education, nurturing, and it might be a short stint, but it still requires it's still required. So I therefore think you should look at what's happened off the back of that very differently. Like the process should be much faster. It should be
Okay.
simpler. It should be more to the value and the financial justification than the value proposition
Yeah.
itself. Like we were speaking about alignment between problem and solution. You've got three things you need to de-risk when you're doing a sales cycle. The first
Hmm.
one is the compatibility of the solution to the problem. That's number one. The second one is the technical compatibility of your solution. Is it integrated in XYZ? Can you measure
Hmm.
XYZ? Blah, blah, blah. And the last one is the financial compatibility of what you're selling. It doesn't have to create massive return on investment, but it has to create a level of benefit that is sufficient to then make the
Yeah.
purchase, right? Um, so outbound, I would probably say that alignment and compatibility between the problem and the solution really high up or kind of
Yeah.
required to start with. Inbound, I would assume that a lot of the work on the solution and the problem has been done outside of your control by the buyer without you being involved or through your content.
Hmm.
And therefore, you can probably reduce that cycle. And then it's really about compatibility on the technical side and compatibility on the financial side. Again, if you've got a software like we do, like you should have a level of documentation that enables that technical due diligence to be quite short. Like you don't have to have 600 calls to validate whether you're able to integrate into a HubSpot or a Salesforce. Like, it
Yeah.
should be documented. So yeah, I would measure things completely differently um, in terms of the expectations from those three blocks.
Hmm. But you still see the need for both modes to care about how the pipeline performs by using the tool like joint close. So regardless if it's inbound or outbound, you still want to
Yeah,
optimize the pipeline, right?
yeah, and then depending on who you sell to, there might be a significant process to then go through post the call you
Yeah.
had from an inbound lead. Like there might be a lot of due diligence that needs to be
Hmm.
performed by a procurement team or something like that, and then that's just as complicated as if it was outbound.
Yeah. That's that's cool. Thank you very much. I see we're coming up on time. Well, to close, do you have any final words to founders that are looking to do better with their sales data? What do they start with? What's the very first thing or the most important thing also they could consider?
Yeah, I would say the systems that you're using are from the 90s. Literally, Salesforce was 1999, right? At the time, the best mobile phone, was the Nokia 3310. So we're back a long time ago. Medpeak, same era, like 25 years old, and the systems are still being used, and that's crazy, right? You don't use your Nokia phone anymore. You've moved to iPhone
Yeah.
16. Your buyer has evolved with the market. Your selling systems are 30 years behind, literally 30 years behind. And I think if your expectation is that you can track modern buying cycles with a 30-year old technology, then you're wrong. Like it's just not gonna work. So going to the modern way to sell, like joint fleece, is an option. It's not the only option, but we're very aligned with what the buyer is going through as opposed to the seller. And then you will
Yeah.
see that the needle moves automatically.
Yeah, that's great. Well, for the sake of this podcast, joint flows is the option. The option. Check out joint flows. If you want to do sales data correctly. I think personally I'm sold at least understanding like what happens in the pipeline when
Yeah.
conducting, you know, a lot of sales. Um, so yeah, thank you so much. This has been fantastic, Nick. For anyone else listening to this, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode. And that's today's episode of Everything Outside Code. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.